Hi everyone. This talk is about designing firmware upgrades around FreeBSD's package manager by Franco. So thanks, and we can start.
Yep. Welcome. Yes, firmware upgrades. Some people love them. I heard some people don't like them, and especially when you're an administrator at work, you maybe have come to dread them because it's a basic trade-off between I would say system security and functional or operational business and your own job security. So if something goes wrong on this side, you better have to work over hours or something like that. So people try to avoid it. And the point of designing firmware upgrades that are safe is that people trust in it and people use it and people use it to keep their infrastructure safe all the time. This talk is about 30 to 45 minutes. I don't know exactly. Sometimes it's faster, sometimes not. And we're going through all of these steps. Basically, what I did was a little bit of a case study for OpenSense, which is a firewall distribution. I get into that really soon. And then just explain how we implemented firmware upgrades to the versions. And at the end, we're going to look at a little firmware upgrade video that I made in the hotel. And I annoyed everybody by downloading a lot of packages. So yeah, that's the talk. And then we can start. I'm Franco. And I'm, in the most modern sense, a Unix engineer. And I do firewalls, operating systems. I did work for Dragonfly BSD. I now program mainly for OpenSense, MDocML, which is a BSD-based graph replacement, 0MQ fixes, and some FreeBSD ports. You can find me on Twitter, on GitHub, and so on. And OpenSense is a project that we forked from pfSense, and it's basically a firewall distribution on top of FreeBSD with a GUI, so you don't have to deal with all the intricacies of the command line of FreeBSD in particular. So everything is supposed to be concise, and you know where to look. For example, for VPN functionality, you go to the VPN tab, you go to OpenVPN, and then you have a wizard to configure your server or your client, and so on and so forth. What we did for OpenSense that is unique is we did pkgng adoption. I get into that just in a bit. We did a Bootstrap interface. The Twitter Bootstrap framework is really, really popular these days. And with that, we can have our GUI on these mobile devices, and it just works. We also did MVC. We started to write APIs for the new functionality that we added. And we also redesigned the build tools, traffic shaper replacement, and so on and so forth. We've had 2 major releases up until now, one in January and one in July. And we plan on doing that in the same manner. And within these 9 months, we did over 40 updates, or almost 40 updates, which means weekly updates, which makes sense when you think about exploits, CVEs, vulnerabilities in the software. Yeah, we did some security enhancements as well, which is LibreSSL as an option. If you don't like OpenSSL, if you think it's the worst thing in the world, then you can switch to LibreSSL, and you won't even notice any difference from your point of view. We're going to have ASLR soon via hardened BSD. We'll try to cooperate on this front and try to bring in these patches, which are supposed to be in FreeBSD at some point, but it just takes time to get these things over, and maybe we can help with that a little bit. We also want to do privilege separation because there's a topic of PHP. Everybody doesn't like PHP, I heard, and it's a security risk and this and that. But okay, if you run it as a root user, then yeah, that happens. So we try to untangle that. We have a backend service that is written in Python now, and the PHP at some point will not be able to do anything but talk to the backend through defined commands. We have an open community. We have multiple translations. German, Japanese, Chinese has progressed nicely. We have more. If anybody wants to contribute, then we are very happy to help them get started. And FreeBSD itself is really old, since 1993. And it was forked from the original Berkeley software distribution. And I think about 3/4, or at least that's what Wikipedia says, about 3/4 of all the BSD deployments right now are FreeBSD. We also have FreeBSD in a modified version in most of the popular, like Juniper OS is somehow based on FreeBSD. They're not really clear about this. We have in the PlayStation 4 FreeBSD. And FreeBSD is very strong in networking and storage. They have native ZFS support. And also, for example, Netflix, the content delivery network of Netflix runs completely on FreeBSD, which serves at least 30% of all US traffic these days, which is a lot. There's a large software collection in the ports, 25,000, so you're going to find everything that you want for your server, for those services, for personal use, for desktops, which is viable now, but you have to set it up manually. But there are millions of tutorials on the internet. Or you can use something like PCBSD, which is a desktop environment manager on top of FreeBSD, so you can pick one of the desktops that you like, and it just runs after installation. And the last thing is pkgng, which is the default package manager in FreeBSD since 10. That was last year. And pkgng was necessary because all the tools were over 20 years old. And I think I saw an older presentation from 2012, and there was the main author, Baptiste, he showed a piece of code, and it said in the beginning as a comment, this code is really ugly, and somebody has made it even uglier. So at some point, they just had to replace all of this, which is what they did. And now it's a binary package manager. They have very, very good dependency tracking for shared libraries as well. And what they want to do is at some point also update FreeBSD itself and the kernel and the base system just in this one tool. So you have one command to upgrade from a major release to the next one with all the packages and just be done with it. It has an easy command structure, countless maintenance tools, and just to see how simple it is. I mean, it's supposed to be this simple. You just install something, you delete something, and you upgrade the system. Yep. Why do we want firmware upgrades that are easy to use and safe and so on? Because we want to ship security updates, hopefully weekly, maybe even in a matter of a day or a couple of hours. If we don't go through updating all the repository, then we can just say, okay, I've rebuilt this new package, and you can install it manually. That's also possible. What we also want is sustainable release engineering, and that means the scripts that do the firmware upgrades, that prepare the firmware upgrades, they should just be able to be run by anybody. They should be able to be automated so that at some point you get daily snapshots. You don't have to even care about that the firmware upgrades might break the box after upgrading. So you need to trust in those tools. And of course, you don't want to annoy the user at all. So the smallest possible impact, which also means you have to do timely updates. You have to do updates every week, every 2 weeks, just to keep people in the habit of upgrading, of seeing new things. Because if you wait 6 months to ship something, then people will say, oh, that's nice, but we don't like it. We want our old system back. And we've seen that a couple of times. So we try to bring in new features bit by bit. So people have a feeling of participation, and that it's good to do firmware upgrades, that it's good to do security updates. We've had somebody in the ISC chat at some point, and I asked him why you're not on the latest version, because it was a couple of versions behind. And he said, no, I don't want to update. I do this every couple of months at most, just to be sure that everything keeps running as it is. And nope, we don't want that. So what does it mean? That means we have to do reliable upgrades. Reliable means the box will come back up when it reboots, when the kernel has been replaced, and hopefully it works better than before. It should be fast. Fast meaning that from a release standpoint, it shouldn't take a couple of days to bring out a new release. If you have a single line that you need fixed, but it's a hot fix because it affects a lot of people, then you want to ship it as soon as possible. So you have to cut the time. And that's why I need the tools and so on, and a proper release process. Sorry. Then it needs to be secure. Secure in this case means checksums, signed packages. It's very important because otherwise somebody could fake updates to a system and you don't want somebody else hijacking your user base and putting in malicious code through that channel. Also, modular updates are very much interesting because a single update that changes one line shouldn't ship the complete system again. Like 600 megabytes for OpenSense installation media, you don't want that for just one line. So you need to break everything down, every service in it. But what that also means is you want to do the least amount of impact on the system when it's running. So if you don't have a kernel update, you don't have to reboot, right? And fancy, it's not the right word, but what it's trying to convey is that if your firmware upgrades look good, then people trust in it more than if they see some text there and, oh, maybe it's working. They don't see any progress. They don't know what's going on. They're not going to trust it. They don't want to run it. And when you have all of that, then people are okay to trigger it remotely when they're traveling, or maybe even automation using a schedule or something like that, so that the firewall probes at 3 a.m. in the morning and maybe even reboots, and then it's back up and people haven't even realized that was happening. And then we come to the timeline. Let me just check my time. Okay. And we first released in January, and we've only released one architecture, which basically meant just one repository, one package repository of about 150 packages, and we could only do package upgrades. So we couldn't update the kernel, we couldn't update the base system, and it was, especially for me, it was really, really scary at this point because I didn't know how to do it. There was a tool in FreeBSD that does that, but it takes a long time to set it up and the infrastructure behind it, so we weren't sure if we were going to use it or not. But we just, at this point, Jos convinced me, Jos is one of the other developers, that it's okay, that we can ship it later. And then, okay, so we shipped OpenSense. We had a preliminary GUI and a backend scripting for firmware upgrades, but not more. Then a week later, we added the second architecture, which was basically just avoiding testing the architecture in the first release or the second architecture in the first release. And now that meant we have 2 repositories, so 300 packages. Then we waited a little to see if the upgrades work. You can see by the version number that we're going forward quite a bit. And then at this point, we could do kernel and base upgrades, which we really, really needed. It's interesting, this fact, because FreeBSD 10.0, which we're using, was approaching end of life, end of February. And as you can see, there's not much time till the end of February. So we just had to get in those upgrades to go to FreeBSD 10.1. And for this purpose, we built the OpenSense update utility, which is basically like what the original FreeBSD update utility does, but we just thought we just wrap it around and try different things and use this one tool for the whole process, hopefully. But at this point, it only did the kernel and base upgrades. Then in the next version, or one of the next versions, we finished the firmware update on the console, which basically meant you could log in via SSH, and you would select this option and say yes, and then it would run all the commands that are necessary and reboot at the end and then come back up, which was a help for some people, so they could already automate it if they wanted to from the outside. And we had one bug that was, if you ran OpenSense update, then it would try to reinstall the kernel all the time, which was a bit annoying, and in this version we fixed it. And in this version we also added the LibreSSL test version, which basically meant now we had 4 package repositories, and things are getting slightly out of, we're getting slightly out of hand at this point, but we just thought, okay, we're going to try this. We're going to keep LibreSSL as a separate build and to see if we can sustain this. Then a little time went by, and we detached the upgrade from the front-end code, which is also a funny story, because when we were trying to move files or deleting files from the repository, the web server needed to be restarted, or PGP CGI needed to be restarted, because it would not want that file moved, because it said, oh, I know where this file is, it's there. And then it wasn't there, so you got a lot of PHP errors and so on. And what happened when we tried to restart the web server was that the web server started the upgrade process, and it was polling, and at some point the upgrade process itself was restarting the web server, so the web server got killed, so the whole update process just stopped. And that's not something that we could ship, so we had to fix that. And what you can also see is we really did a lot of experiments with the version numbers. This is 15.1.8.4, and some people said, nope, you can't do this anymore. We had to change it for the next major version, but we got the hint at this point. Then a little while later, we switched on the package signature verification, which we had implemented a little bit before the packages were signed, but we weren't sure if we were going to lock ourselves out by just switching it on right when we started signing the packages. So we waited a little and tested a little. And that was a very important step, because now the updates are secure. Now the updates are verified and signed, and we can rotate those keys in the future as well. So that was a big step for the firmware upgrades. Then in May, at the end of May, we rewrote the GUI parts in model view controller style, and also added an API. So now you could have something like a REST probe to this API and see if there were new updates, and also trigger the updates if you wanted to. And then more time went by. We're just quite happy with what was going on. But at some point, people said, oh, it's so stupid, I have to click 2 times to fetch updates. So we went back and said, okay, how can we make the process shorter? How can we make it more concise? How can we make it more deliberate? And so we just took some GUI elements, shifted them around, made it a little bit easier, made the JavaScript a little more clever, so that tabs were switched automatically depending on what you were supposed to view in the firmware upgrades. And also at this point, OpenSense update got a new ability that it could deal with the packages as well. Before it was only based in kernel, now it also had the packages, so with one single command you could update the whole box. Which isn't for a user very interesting, but for us it was very interesting to test and also to automate these things later. And then we're now we're past the major release. And as you can see, it was about a month where firmware upgrades haven't been changed at all. We just set out a new version and try to see if there was anything else that we can fix beside firmware upgrades. And originally, we wanted to do LibreSSL builds as a side grade for OpenSSL images, which meant that we only have one image, which is OpenSSL, but in the GUI, you can just switch to LibreSSL and do a firmware upgrade, and then everything will be done. That didn't work in the original version because there was some library dependency tracking issue. And what that meant was when you installed LibreSSL on your box, then it would delete the web interface. And the web server would still be running, but there were no pages to view, so that wasn't a good thing. But in this version, we fixed it, and it was a really huge step forward because pkgng itself is really, really powerful. Because when you look at it in a more technical way, we had 2 separate repositories, one with OpenSSL, built on OpenSSL, like 150 ports or packages itself. About 50 of them use OpenSSL they need to be built against it, and they have to have matching shared library numbers and so on and so forth. And if you for LibreSSL it was completely different. So what pkgng actually thinks it's doing is that this is the new version. And it realizes, okay, there's some dependency that changed, I need to exchange this library, and then it does this. And that's working really well for us. I don't know of anybody who does it in the FreeBSD world at this point, but we're really happy that it just works out of the box. Then we went back and fixed more user experience stuff. We did a little reboot functionality where the screen freezes and you're supposed to wait until the machine is back up, and the JavaScript actually polls for the machine to come back up so that you can show the login screen right when it's back up. So make it snappy for the user to see, okay, now this has rebooted, it's back, and I don't have to do anything about it. We also added the GUI package overview, so now you can view all the packages that we have installed, which is also important later for plugins and so on. And we also introduced the first development version for OpenSense, which meant that we now had 2 GUI packages, one of them being the stable one and the other one being the development version. And you could switch back and forth between the two and see how much progress we've made. And it also helped us to prioritize features and to get people involved into testing just by the command line, trying out the development package, if it works now or not. And then we could take it into the stable version in the next release. And then there was one piece missing. A user asked us, he was from China, he said, I want to do firmware upgrades, but I don't want to do them at 50 kilobytes a second. It was just too slow for those people in China because of reasons that are beyond our control. So he asked for setting up a mirror, which we helped him to do, and we now have about 6 or 7 mirrors that work really well. So he set up a mirror, and we added this functionality for everybody. So now you can choose a mirror in the United States, East Coast, West Coast, in Sweden. We have a mirror in France, Amsterdam, Frankfurt, and also China. And with this piece, we went into the next iteration and added the GUI mirror and crypto selection into the GUI. So everything that we promised that we would have in the second major release, we had at this point, which is still okay for users. And this is the demo time. Basically, what I'm going to show you is a little upgrade from the last version, which is .11 to .12, which, by the way, got released here at the conference. So that shows how the release engineering process works most of the time and reliably. And one of the statements from our users is that, yeah, he can upgrade the firewall from his bed with a phone, and it's convenient. So right. So I need to scrub through this because I did this in the hotel last night, and the Wi-Fi connection wasn't very good, so it took 25 minutes to upgrade the system. This is the installation. I'm just going to take you through this. It's very simple. You load it on a USB stick or an ISO image. You reboot the box, and then it comes up as OpenSense. You do simple first configuration of the network devices, and then here, it comes up, it knows its IP address, then you can browse to the box. It's a self-signed certificate, of course, at this point. And yep, there's the initial wizard, which we can skip. Okay, and then you can see from the firmware upgrade, this, by the way, is the package view that I talked about, which needs more buttons and extra packages that can be installed in the repository and so on. But you have a lot of visibility for which version is actually active. And pkgng also has functionality to probe which packages are vulnerable. So then you could also annotate those things at some point, but step by step. So we probe for the firmware, which takes a long time. And then here we can see there's an update available. It's based on OpenSSL because we were in the OpenSSL version. Then we're going to switch to LibreSSL. Yep. It takes a little bit. And back to the firmware upgrades, refetching, which didn't work the first time for whatever reason. Whoops. Okay. And this is the second time. And now you can see beyond all the normal packages that needed to be upgraded, now we have this block of LibreSSL and some of the dependencies that pkgng wants to reinstall because the libraries underneath changed. So everything taken care of. And we have a little screen if it's going to reboot. Yes, no, maybe. And then the firmware fetching takes place. And this is all pkgng at this point. We just thought it would be really cool to have this visibility for people so they know what kind of system they're working on. If they come from FreeBSD, then they know exactly what's going on. If they don't come from FreeBSD, then people still see what's going on and maybe get interested in what's going on underneath. Is there anything that I can learn from this? And then at some point, LibreSSL is done. Yep. Then package starts upgrading those packages. Yep. And then it goes into the kernel and base upgrade, which also takes a long time on the hotel Wi-Fi. And then and it's applying the updates. And after it has applied the updates, it will go into the reboot mode, which is this one. And then you can see that the box starts to reboot. There it is. And it comes back up. And it waits for an IP address for a long time. And then the JavaScript notices, oh, it's back. So we can go back to the box and log in. And as you can see, we've upgraded to .12 and the newest LibreSSL version is installed. And that's it. Yeah, the point is, for some people, they say, okay, this is exactly how it's supposed to work. But it takes a long time to get to this point, to give people that those tools in a concise way, and have it not fail on people. That it just, you have to be careful. That's the point. And what we still have to do a lot, probably more, as I wrote. We want to have daily snapshots. That you can also choose from the GUI. We want to have scheduled updates. I talked about this a little bit. The infrastructure for the plugins. And we also need to go to FreeBSD 11 at some point, which means upgrading the kernel, which means maybe some base utilities are not going to work anymore. And that's tricky. But we'll get there, I think. So that's it. Thank you. Check out FreeBSD if you want, OpenSense as well. And are there any questions? No? OK. Great. Then, thanks.